we all think we know the story, right? In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. But what if I told you the single most important part of that story, the part that guaranteed he'd actually make it there and back, has been a total mystery for over 500 years? Yeah, let's get into it.
You know, the simple answer we all learned in school is he just sailed west. But the real answer? It's so much more complicated, and honestly, way more brilliant than that. The real question isn't just that he did it, but how on earth did he know the one perfect way to do it? And, maybe even more important, how to get back home.
See, if Columbus had just pointed his ships west from Spain, he would have sailed straight into brutal, relentless headwinds. The whole expedition would have been a complete disaster. His journey wasn't a straight line at all. It was this incredible four-part masterclass in navigation that used the ocean's invisible highways of wind and current perfectly.
Okay, check this out, because this is where the genius lies. First, he sails south to the Canary Islands to get below those nasty headwinds. Smart. Then, he hangs a right and sails west, catching the trade winds that basically act like a giant conveyor belt, pushing him all the way to the West Indies. But for the return trip, he doesn't fight those winds. No way. He sails north, way up into the open Atlantic, until he finds the westerlies, which blow him straight back to Europe. It's a perfect, elegant, closed-loop system.
So, that's the multi-million-dollar question, isn't it? How did he know to do that? How could he possibly understand this incredibly complex system of winds and currents without ever having been there before? This wasn't just a lucky guess. The evidence screams that he had a map, a detailed route plan, and for centuries, nobody had a clue where he got it.
Well, the answer to this puzzle wasn't going to be found in some stuffy old library by a traditional academic. No, it was going to take a very specific, very unique kind of detective to crack this case.
And this slide really nails the problem. For 500 years, you had two groups of people looking at this. On one side, you had historians. They could read the old manuscripts in Latin and Greek, no problem. But ask them to navigate a ship across a pond? Not a chance. On the other side, you had sailors and mariners. They understood the winds, the currents, the feel of the ocean. But they weren't spending their time digging through medieval texts. The answer was lost in that gap between them.
And then came Paul H. Chapman. And this guy, well, he was the missing link. He was uniquely qualified to solve this thing. Get this. He was a history major who loved ancient texts. But he was also a World War II navigator who spent the years 1942 to 45 ferrying planes across the very same part of the Atlantic. He knew cartography and navigation not from a book, but from first-hand life-or-death experience. And you can see it right here in his own words. He basically says that his real-world training gave him a kind of decoder ring for these ancient texts. A phrase that a historian might see as just flowery, poetic language, Chapman saw as a clear, literal navigational instruction. He could read between the lines because he had actually lived them.
So, where did Chapman aim his unique combination of skills? He turned to a document that had been hiding in plain sight for centuries, one that most experts had written off as just a bunch of religious folklore.
The clue was a text called the Navigatio Sancti Brendani Abbatis, which translates to the Voyage of St. Brendan the Abbot. It tells the story of a very real Irish monk from the 6th century who supposedly took this epic 7-year sea journey across the Atlantic with his crew.
And this wasn't some rare, obscure text either. There are over 120 surviving Latin manuscripts of this story. It was a medieval bestseller. It was all over Europe. We know for a fact that copies existed in the very same places where Columbus and his brother were working as cartographers. The takeaway here? Columbus almost certainly knew this story, and knew it well.
But here's the kicker. While most scholars read about sea monsters and talking whales, and just dismiss the whole thing as a fairy tale, Chapman's navigator eye saw something totally different. He looked past the mythical stuff and recognized the precise, factual language of a sailor's logbook, packed with details about directions, travel times, winds, currents, and land descriptions.
So Chapman started his investigation. He decided to treat this myth not as a story, but as a legitimate set of sailing directions. He was going to plot them on a modern map and see where in the world they led.
And his method was just brilliant in its simplicity. First, he ignored all the fantastical stuff and just focused on the hard data: directions, days sailed, descriptions of land. Second, he translated the text literally, as a navigator would. So a phrase like "sailing toward the summer sunset" wasn't poetry to him. That was a clear bearing, northwest. Third, he plotted this course, using modern data on winds and currents to see where they would have actually carried a 6th century ship. And finally, he'd check. Did the islands and lands described in the text actually match the real-world geography of his plotted destinations?
So what did he find? Well, for starters, Brendan didn't just sail west from Ireland into the unknown, just like Columbus wouldn't sail west from Spain. Nope, the journey started by heading northwest, up toward the Faroe Islands.
From there, the plotted route takes a massive turn south. It leads down the entire eastern Atlantic, a journey of thousands of miles, all the way to the Azores. Does that sound familiar? It should. It's the exact same strategy as the first leg of Columbus's voyage. Go south first.
And then, from the Azores, the logbook describes a turn to the west. This is the moment. This is the exact latitude where they could catch those same incredible trade winds that Columbus would use 900 years later to sail clear across the Atlantic to the West Indies. It was a perfect match.
So when Chapman finished plotting all 4 legs of Brendan's journey described in the text and laid it all out, the result was just, wow, it was absolutely stunning. The solution to that 500-year-old mystery was suddenly staring him right in the face.
I mean, just look at this. It's all right here. The comparison is jaw-dropping. Both voyages start by heading south to get into the right position. Both then cross the Atlantic by heading west on the trade winds. Both return home by first sailing north to catch the westerlies, and both complete the circuit by sailing east back to Europe. The strategy, the pattern, it's identical. It's a 900-year-old echo.
So here it is, the solution. Columbus wasn't just some lucky guy who stumbled his way across the ocean. He knew exactly what he was doing because he had a map, a route plan, and that plan came directly from the documented voyage of a 6th century Irish monk named Brendan the Navigator. And this whole thing just blows the doors open, doesn't it? It really makes you wonder, if the story of St. Brendan wasn't a myth, but was actually a detailed map, how many other ancient legends that we've dismissed as fantasy are really just misunderstood logbooks, waiting for the right person with the right skills to come along and finally read them correctly?